It is hard to take much away from Barcelona's 5-0 victory over Ceuta in the Copa del Rey round of 16. But the big takeaway is that Barcelona got their goals and now they're moving on to the quarterfinals. And with that fortunate draw, it meant that Barca didn't have to take any part in that 3-2 Real Madrid-Villarreal clash or any of the other round of 16 matchups against first or second division sides. Instead, that, as we'll call it, a fortunate draw against a third-tier team meant that Barcelona, I think, making up a little bit for the luck that they didn't get in the Champions League group draw where they were given Inter Milan and Bayern Munich. But anyway, they got a third division side in the Copa del Rey, and the job really was not to lose. The stakes of this game were all about Barcelona just taking care of business and doing anything they had to do. Don't lose, don't pick up any injuries, and hopefully you can get some of your fringe players of the first team into some better form that they're in. Because I think that was Xavi's focus too. He made 10 changes from the 11 that started in the Spanish Super Cup, and Ansu Fati wound up being not one of those changes. He will start on the weekend against Getafe. So everybody knew going into that exactly, or I think somewhat of what to expect from a lot of the players that we're going to feature. Sure, it took Barcelona a bit of time to get into that game, but they might have still been dealing with the emotional hangover from that victory in the Spanish Super Cup, and it's also hard to blame them with the travel to get down to North Africa, where Ceuta is located, because Barcelona now in a matter of 2 weeks have played against Spanish sides in both Africa, Asia, and in Europe. But Ceuta didn't care much about that, and I guess neither did I because it wasn't one of the 5 headlines. So let's hit those. Here are the 5 headlines from Barcelona's 5-0 win over Ceuta in the Copa del Rey round of 16. Headline 1 is 5 does the job. I could have probably just had one headline here and ran through those 5 goals, get in, get out, and we're done with the 5 headlines. But I think it's important to note that that is what should be the headline here. I'm not starting at the beginning because that's going to be the second headline, and I'm not starting about the choppy way that individual players didn't shine or could have shown or had good performances or bad performance. I think it really is summed up by the goals, and I can't even extrapolate too much from those goals. I'm even talking about the Ansu goal, because as we run through them, you're going to see defensively, Ceuta, well, they weren't on their best on the day, and Barcelona did a good job of taking advantage of that with their superior quality, as they should be doing against a third division side. So as I said, while it took until the 41st minute, Barcelona did break through and they never looked back. That was the only positive thing to note from the first half. Raphinha's goal, the 1-0, poor defending by Ceuta here though. No one steps properly to Raphinha, and the Brazilian has way too much time and space on his left foot. It was also a mistake by the left back, David Alfonso Romero. Gave way too much time and space to Raphinha's deadly left foot. Obviously, we've seen that Raphinha usually doesn't have that kind of time and space to let go with a curler like that, but he did. Barca put him in a spot to succeed by quickly getting the ball across to him in an isolated position with room to come inside, which is Raphinha's perfect scenario. And while that first half was hard to watch, the second was much better. Barcelona even began that half with sustained pressure, which does lead to their second goal. It comes for Lewandowski, getting the 2-0, though, with a lot of credit to Kessie. He's the one who gets the takeaway, and then Lewandowski finding that narrow window at the near post. At that point, it was 2 assists for Franck Kessie. Jumping ahead, Ansu comes on as a sub, gets the 3-0, putting the game away. He was isolated on the left, and that's what made it easy. And it is interesting that he was isolated with so much space. Another mistake by Ceuta, because Ansu, with Barcelona usually overloading that left side, isn't often just isolated on that left so much. But hey, if you're going to give him that space, I'm glad he was able to take opportunity and get that goal he did. It probably should have been a brace too a little later on, but the keeper was able to get just enough of a toe on it to deny Ansu his second, but I think he'll be happy with the goal he scored. It did feel like a vintage Ansu goal, but again, it came against defending that was less than stellar on the night. The 4-0 Kessie, and we'll talk more about him later, got his goal to go along with the 2 assists. Raphinha returning the favor, and once again being given way too much space to deliver a ball. For Kessie, it shows you where he's comfortable and where he makes an impact. That's farther up the field, which does make sense why he was better next to Gavi than Torre. Again, we'll get into that in a second. Because Gavi, the interior, plays deeper than Kessie, that allowed him to push forward with a bit more conviction than when he was with Torre, and that's how he also got Barcelona's 4th goal. The 5-0 comes, Lewandowski gets his second, and even though he had a brace in this game, it felt like Lewandowski only had to be in second gear, and I guess that's what pays to be one of the top strikers in the world. But Eric Garcia gets the interception, dribbles into space, and Ceuta completely done with the game by that point. Lewandowski had time to get onto his right foot and easily slots it in home. And for each of those 5 goals, while it seemed like I was being critical of the defending for Ceuta, I was. In the same regard, I do want to give a little bit of compliments to feeling like these Barcelona players, as I said, for Ansu, it felt like a throwback of a goal to when Ansu felt healthy. For Raphinha, getting a curl-over shot off his left foot, getting that space, it feels like something you really want to see from him. Lewandowski getting an easy brace, doesn't have to think too much of it. That's what you want to see from Lewandowski. And Franck Kessie, well, the first half was one thing, the second half was something different. As he was playing well, he also gets a goal that I think he earned by being a part of that attack. So all 5 of those goals, I think they mean something, even if the opponent kind of allowed that to happen, if that makes any sense. Headline 2 is give them a minute. These other 4 headlines are going to be a bit quicker here because I think, as I said, the one headline from that game was the 5 goals that were scored. And in that first half, yeah, it was rough. And I hope people don't focus too much on that first half. I think when you saw Captain Sergio Roberto, which is a bit odd though because he is the second captain. So if it's not Busquets, and it's not Roberto, and it's not Alba, then it has to be Ter Stegen. So that does tell you that Roberto being a captain, it feels weird, but it shouldn't actually be that weird when you look at the captain hierarchy at this point this season. But I have to give credit at this point, though, to Ceuta a little bit. Their coach, Jose Juan Romero, had his team starting with decent pressure, and they were fine to start this game, but they weren't amazing. They weren't reinventing the wheel. Barcelona, I think, weren't ready for the game. Maybe it was that emotional hangover from the Spanish Super Cup, but you could say that all of Franck Kessie, Pablo Torre, and Sergio Roberto struggled in the midfield, and I think the reason for that is none of those three. You can say all you want about physicality or Roberto's job as a defender or right back. You could say what on paper it seems like Kessie is going to provide to you. All 3 of those players are not ball winners, and I think Barca did struggle in the early part of this game, not having some kind of designated player who's just going to win every ground duel. Frankie de Jong doesn't do that either. The 2 best as far as Barcelona's midfield are still easily Busquets by a country mile, and then Gavi. But in defense of Barca too, I think that's what you get when you put. And I know that Xavi said these weren't the second-tier players or the fringe, whatever he had said in the press conference. He wanted to say these aren't the secondary players, but they were. When you rotate the way you did, and you trust the players that are on the fringe of the squad in the way that Xavi did, I think it's fair to expect a little bit of rough around the edges play, because you have a number of players who are either out of confidence or out of form, trying to figure something out, and it was a good sign that the team as a whole found themselves collectively in the second half. And I also understand the argument that people want to see more youngsters in earlier parts in the Copa del Rey here against this kind of opponent, because at least with that argument, the youngsters who are playing in the third division are regularly playing in the third division, as opposed to being first-team players like a Pablo Torre, who is rarely featuring at all. The only player I come away from this game being truly worried about is the same player I was worried about who had that cameo against Real Betis, and that's Ferran Torres. He put in a pedestrian 60 minutes. And I am concerned in the way that even Raphinha, while he is out of form and trying to figure a few things out, really desperate for a goal, that is Raphinha, it just felt like Ferran Torres was not even sleepwalking. He just couldn't find his way. Like Xavi says, he's working hard. He is. He's trying to figure some things out. But, I mean, this is the kind of game where you have to figure that out. So it is unfortunate that Ferran Torres wasn't able to make the most of these minutes. Not even to try to figure out more playing time for him or earn his spot, but honestly, just to give him a little bit of confidence. And unfortunately, this is the kind of opponent you have to be able to do that against. Headline 3 is feed problems. For the first time ever in 5 headlines history, I'm going to get a little meta here and talk about something that happened, well, not on the field or not within the game, but on my end, because for those watching in the United States, you might have had a little bit of issue with your feed. It was cutting in and out. So I have to be honest and say that if something did happen in a 15-minute stretch between the 22nd minute and like the 37th minute in the first half, well, unfortunately, I did miss it because I didn't get to see it. So if there is something I missed and maybe Ferran Torres did something incredible, well, you'll have to let me know down in the comments below. But I doubt people are going to give Ferran Torres too many compliments without being prompted. But for those who've been with me for a while, you know that I generally do try to give the opponent as much credit as possible, and I do try to establish and create expectations for the stakes of every match and make it feel like every match that Barcelona is playing, because they haven't won that many trophies in the last few seasons, feel like there's some kind of weight on every single match, even a Copa del Rey side against a third-tier team. But the feed cutting out was a little bit of a wake-up call for me. Maybe this one doesn't have the same high stakes, and certainly the venue was a reminder of that. Because I know people were complaining about how the camera angle made it look like it was the 1980s or 1990s, but having been alive for part of that, it really wasn't that bad, but it is interesting in a bad way having an angle like that. Because watching anything off the ball is pretty difficult, and it's much harder to see the totality of an attacking play, so I might have missed some of that too. But the inverse of that is that if Ceuta wasn't playing against Barcelona, I absolutely would have wanted them to get the upset. Because even in this round of 16, when Osasuna, who beat Real Betis, who is the defending champion, when they beat them yesterday, well, it was treated like an upset because they were the reigning champions. But if Osasuna takes 3 points off Real Betis in La Liga, it's the tiniest upset, but looking at their standings in La Liga, well, it's not that crazy. So upsets and the magic of the Copa, and that's really why I care about Copa del Rey. That's why everybody cares about these knockout competitions. So unfortunately, Ceuta withdrawn against Barcelona because I would have rooted for them against anybody else. Headline 4 is Pablo Torre or Franck Kessie for one spot. I think there's a lot of people who are fairly frustrated by Pablo Torre coming on at halftime. And it's more frustrating, I think, to me, that no journalist in that press conference asked Xavi about that. Because I think there would have been a good reason for it, and now we're left just hypothesizing why Franck Kessie stayed on the field and Pablo Torre came off. Because while Franck Kessie, it's rewriting history, had a really good second half, well, Torre wasn't necessarily the worst midfielder on the field in that first half either, just in my view. I think Pablo Torre was doing this mini Pedri impression. While his ball retention isn't as good as Pedri's, when he gets into those advanced areas, and the tactical choice is to have both Kessie and Roberto support him a little bit, Pablo Torre can do really well in tight spaces. And you could see some of those things moving and some of those things coming along as that first half even was going on for Pablo Torre, and those are positive signs to see. There are also moments tactically where he was dropping in the way Pedri does when Barca are struggling and circulating the ball alongside Roberto. So it's good to see that Pablo Torre was given that responsibility as well. Unfortunately, and I think the big reason why he was taken out of this first half is because of what I said 2 headlines ago, that none of Torre, Kessie, and Roberto are ball winners. So Torre wound up just being the guy to be taken off for Gabi, who came on and added a ton on the press. It takes a long time for anybody to understand the nuances and just the amount of fight, I think, and desire and what it takes to be in form to pressure the way Xavi expects his Barcelona teams to press. And so having 3 players in Roberto, Kessie, and Torre, who may only really be operating at like 60 or 70% of actual true match fitness due to them being rotation pieces, maybe they just didn't have what it took. And that press wasn't good enough in the first half from Barca. Gabi immediately comes on in the second half, and everything changes. So would it have changed if Kessie had come off instead of Torre? Yeah, I think Gabi was the difference for no matter who it was. Could even have been Sergio Roberto, though that would have, I think, thrown something out of whack there. Because again, Torre, Kessie, and Gabi, none of the 3 are actual natural pivots or defensive midfielders. But Barcelona might even been able to make it work and push that pressure and line of confrontation even higher. The assist on the second goal, I think in the big picture of this season at least, is important for Kessie more than Torre to have gotten that interception and then delivered the second assist, that being Kessie did, of the game. Because I think the way that this squad is structured, Xavi does need Kessie to be in better form than Pablo Torre. I know that there are rumors that Kessie might be on his way out and all those things, but I'm not so sure about that. I think on the wages he's on and the contract that he signed, a lot of work would have to be done behind the scenes to move a player who just came 6 months ago. And for Xavi, I think we've seen there are players he believes in and there are players he doesn't, and he did sign off on Kessie, so I think he believes that there is something to be worked with and figured out. And as I've defended Kessie many times before, it does take a while to get used to and understand the nuances of Barcelona, especially if you're a player like him coming from AC Milan who play an entirely different style in an entirely different league. Headline 5 is Femení Finish. Because of the stakes of this Copa del Rey match, I did have one headline left to play with, and I wanted to make mention that while the men's first team cruised to that 5-0, well, the Femení today didn't have it as easy in El Clásico in the Spanish Super Cup, that being the semifinals against Real Madrid. They had to settle for a 3-1 extra time win, where in the 59th minute, Irene Paredes picked up her second yellow, so Barcelona did all of that being extra time and the last 30 minutes of regulation with just 10. And you do remember that 2 seasons ago in that tremendous treble season, it was just a treble because they lost the Spanish Super Cup. So there's something about the Femení taking this competition in second gear. But either way, Claudia Raphinha with a great goal in the first half, but Caroline Ware for Real Madrid tied it up, and then 2 goals in extra time, the 111th minute winner from Maradona from the penalty spot. Lucy Bronze winning that penalty kind of against a run of play where Real Madrid did have a little bit of something there in the second half. Madrid also, by the way, knocked out of the Champions League, so any trophy for them, they do have something to play for. So fortunately, the Femení are moving on now to the final of the Spanish Super Cup, and hopefully they can take their first trophy home of the season as well. So that's it. It might be a trophy week for FC Barcelona. Barca will have to wait on the Copa del Rey, but they took care of business, as I said. We're recording the podcast in a few hours, so, subscribe to the channel, of course, but maybe even keep the tab open because of how quickly I'm going to try to be able to turn that content around tonight. But subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one, that being the weekend against Getafe, where Ansu Fati is expected to get the start. And as always, until next time, Forza Barca.